Comerica Park in Detroit, 25 years old, 25 years of baseball at that ballpark. It looks fantastic. It feels like an old school ballpark. I've been up there for games 3 times now. I'm going to try to go every single year, whether the Reds are playing or not. It's that good of a ballpark. It kind of feels like this old school ballpark, but it's clean and it's modern. And there's great sight lines, and there's different types of seats and different ways you can view the game, and there's patios, and there's just all sorts of great stuff. This ballpark is cavernous too. I mean, 342 down the left field line, that alley that they have in right center, you get a bunch of triples out of there. A little bit of a porch in right, still easy for a poke for a left-hander. That is such an awesome ballpark. And I got to experience it last week. And if you're watching on YouTube, you see this is the jersey. This is the jersey I'm wearing. This was the giveaway. The 1990 Detroit Red Stars jersey. 1919, excuse me. Detroit Red Stars jersey. They were celebrating the Negro Leagues at Comerica Park. It was really cool. They did a great job honoring those people. Had some legends from the Negro Leagues there. Presented them with a bat and all sorts of different stuff. It was really neat. But yeah, I've been to that ballpark a few times now, and you know what? It's official. It's my favorite ballpark in the big leagues. You also, I've been to, I think, 15 games now, 15, 16 games. I'm going to end up well over 20, maybe 30 by the time the season is over. That's a lot of baseball. But, I love the Reds. I love Great American Ballpark. I have a lot of appreciation and respect for it. It's the only ballpark I've ever known. But when you go to other ballparks like I have in Truist Park in Atlanta or Comerica Park in Detroit, Washington, D.C. at Nationals Park, Minute Maid Park in Houston, Wrigley Field, and others, you kind of see how the Reds are just a little bit behind in the in-game presentation, in the graphics packages, in kind of connecting the city to the ballpark, I guess, or to the fans, or I don't know. There's not like that stamp of Cincinnati, I feel like, on the ballpark. And you could make the argument that the riverboat and the power stacks, like that's what could be more Cincinnati. And you have a point there. But I think I just realized how Great American Ballpark is now almost 25 years old. It's not as old as Comerica Park, but it's showing its age a little bit. And I know that there's a lot going on with state funding and Hamilton County and the Bengals and all sorts of stadium projects in the state of Ohio trying to figure out how they're going to help the teams pay for some of that stuff. But I definitely know that Great American Ballpark will be due for a facelift sometime soon. But man, Comerica Park, that whole area, Detroit gets a bad rap. I've said this before. Detroit is a revitalized city. It's a nice city. I've been there 4 or 5 times now. I've never felt unsafe. Like downtown area is so cool, especially around the ballpark and around Ford Field. Just chef's kiss. Detroit. I don't like to say anything positive about Michigan, but the city of Detroit is freaking awesome. All right, let's get into it. Okay, I must admit, I don't know if I'm necessarily in the right mental state to be doing this podcast today. There was something that happened to me yesterday that I really just, I hate it. I was very offended by. I felt insulted by. I'm angry about. And I didn't like the way I reacted to it. I was pissed off. I threw things. I was all mad. I was honked off. And I just became an irritable, unpleasant person to be around. And, sitting with that, I didn't like the way I reacted to it. And having a night to sleep on it, I feel a little bit better and, understand that there's only so much that I can do. But, I heard I went to church on Sunday, and the pastor of the church delivered a message about how when things go bad for you in your life, when something happens, when something goes wrong, how do you choose to respond? How are the different ways that you can respond that are reflections of your faith and your relationship with God? And this is not by any means a podcast about relationship with God, but it had me thinking as I sat through my anger yesterday and my frustration about this insulting thing that happened to me at work. And I just didn't like the way I responded. I have every right to be mad. I have every right to be angry. And I'm still steaming hot mad about it. You might be able to tell. But I didn't like the way I responded. I wish I would have handled it better. I didn't attack anybody. I didn't say anything to anybody. I threw a notepad down while I was all by myself. I was cursing under my breath quite a bit. And quite frankly, in the moment, I just walked away from the person, which I'm glad that I did. But it was, it's all about how you respond when things happen to you. So I hope that I find a way to respond better and just do my best, focus on me and what I can control in my life and in my work and whatever it might be. And so that means doing stuff like the Ball Don't Lie podcast. I have no reason really to tell you that. Maybe I just needed to get it off my chest, whatever's going on with me, but here we are. I don't know. I thought last week on the podcast was the worst podcast that I've ever recorded. I really did. I didn't even post the YouTube video. I just thought I did a bad job of trying to explain everything that was going on, and I felt chaotic and rushed, and I felt like I didn't do a good job on the podcast. And then I went back and listened to it again today and realized I made all the points really that I wanted to make. And I felt like I did it in a clear and concise way. So that makes me feel better. And if you're someone who watches on YouTube, I apologize. I should have done a better job of uploading the podcast. But we're here now on episode number 141. And if I haven't said it already, hi, hello, and welcome. I'm Austin Elmore, and I am your host. Right after I finished recording and pressed the publish button on the podcast last week, it was reported by Adam Schefter of ESPN that Shemar Stewart is leaving Bengals minicamp. We talked about this last week. It was a 3-day mandatory minicamp for the Bengals. And if you're not there, you can be fined and blah, 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 blah. Well, apparently, we know that Trey Hendrickson did not show up. And Shemar Stewart, who was there on day one and made a spectacle of himself in the media, you heard that last week on the podcast. And then all the nonsense surrounding the contract following that, he reported to day 2. But in the day 3 of minicamp, he left early. Now, there wasn't a lot going on. There wasn't a bunch of meetings. It was kind of a walkthrough practice early on. And he said he left because he didn't want to be a distraction to his teammates. Well, buddy, you're already a distraction to your teammates. Anyways, so that happened right after I had pressed the publish button on the podcast, and I didn't have a chance to take it back. And I just continued to think that Shemar Stewart and his agent and the people around him are giving him bad advice. Negotiating through the media is not a good strategy. His agent has been on Twitter replying to people and reporters and other people like me. They've been replying to them and basically negotiating through social media as well. I've talked to some people that have talked to the agent. I've talked to some people around the team. Everybody seems to say the same thing. Zach Hiller, the agent for Shemar Stewart, and the people around Shemar are in over their head with this contract negotiation. Now, we talked previously about the default language. That's what the report was from Pro Football Talk about what the major sticking point is in the contract. Well, we got some confirmation about that from Shemar Stewart's stepdad, Mo Marquez. I believe it's his stepdad. Apologies if I'm wrong on that. So he posted, and Marquez is a defensive line coach down in Florida, has been a big part of Shemar's life. He was with him when he got to Cincinnati, got drafted. It's a very impactful and important person in the life of Shemar Stewart. He posted on June 10th, not a person in this world would sign a contract stating that if you do something wrong this year, the company you work for can take the remaining 4 or 5 years of your contract, especially when the person has had 0 infractions for 21 years. So this is confirmation from the Stewart camp that it is about this default language. He's wrong in the sense of most people that sign contracts sign a contract that says that. If you screw up, we can terminate your contract and you won't get that money. That's basic, everyday human beings do that and have that in their jobs and in their contracts. Um, the difference here is that the Bengals historically have not done this with contracts. We've talked about how in the past the contract structure has changed for first round picks, and in and of itself, the Bengals have changed the way they do some contract structure. So you want to talk about setting a precedent. The Bengals set a precedent with Joe Burrow when they guaranteed money beyond year number one. They reaffirmed that precedent with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins when they guaranteed money beyond year one. The NFLPA and the way that they have slotted first round draft picks and draft pick money, the way they did that was to get more guaranteed money for the players. So it's less money overall, but more of it is guaranteed. And so, as a part of this contract structure, when you have guarantees beyond year one, teams want to protect themselves. Why the Bengals? Now, this stuff has been slotted for a while now. It's not new. Why the Bengals have chosen to begin adding this default language to a first round picks contract, I don't know. I think it's a fair criticism to say this was not the right time for the Bengals to do this. I wouldn't necessarily disagree with it. You have to know when to pick your battles, especially with what's going on with Trey Hendrickson. More on Trey in just a moment. But this is a very common clause. This is very common language used in picks and in contracts across the league. It's not uncommon by any stretch. It's just uncommon for the Bengals. The Bengals want to use Shemar Stewart to set a precedent in the way that they negotiate contracts. Because, to me, this is an indicator that the Bengals are going to more into or are going to actually guarantee money beyond the first year. We've seen it with Burrow, Chase, and Higgins. They're probably going to see it with Trey Hendrickson. And so the Bengals want to say, hey, we don't typically do this with contracts, but we want to set a precedent that if we are going to guarantee money beyond year one, we want some protection from that. So if a player does this, does that, whatever it might be, that's the big issue. So what I don't quite understand and what I'm still looking for answers for, and later today, Wednesday, June the 18th, I'm going to talk alongside Tony Pike to Jeremy Fowler of ESPN, who is reporting some stuff about the Trey Hendrickson deal and NFL Insider. I'm going to ask him a little bit about what you can and can't negotiate with this default language. I'm also going to ask that question to Mike Florio on Monday on Cincy 360. I'm going to be hosting the show solo and talking to Mike Florio. I hope to bring some of that to you on Wednesday of next week. No, can you negotiate the case-by-case basis that's in this default language? For example, if it says that a player loses his future guarantees if he's arrested. Okay, are we going to wait for a ruling? Are we going to wait for charges? Are we going to wait for an indictment? Are we going to allow there to be space for if he's wrongly arrested? What if a player is accused of a crime? Like, for example, let's use a Trevor Bauer accusation or a Justin Tucker accusation where there's been no charges and everything's been dropped in court, but there's been a lot of damage to his reputation and to the team's reputation. Can he still get his money if he's not ultimately charged with something? If the drug test is something that if he fails a drug test and it was administered by the team, does he still get his money even though it wasn't his fault? Or if whatever caused the failed drug test was administered by the team is what I'm saying. I want to know, can you negotiate on a case-by-case basis those specific things? Because if so, I could understand why they would want to do that. If a guy is wrongly arrested or if he's accused or whatever it might be, I understand totally. You want to protect your money. And you want to be as specific about each case and each thing that happens so that you protect your money. That I would love to know if that's a possibility and if the Bengals are even open to negotiating that or if they're just saying, this is the language, how we wrote it, take it or leave it. So the other point here is, and he posted this, Shemar's dad or his coach, basically, and I quote tweeted it. I said this is more confirmation from the Stewart camp about the default language being the sticking point in negotiations with the Bengals. And then I went on to say that personally speaking, if I went 21 years of life with no infractions, I think I could probably go another 4 if it meant I got life-changing money for me and my family, but everyone is different. That's what I posted. And I stand by that. to be completely honest. And listen, I know I used the example at the beginning of this about how everybody has contracts like this. I don't think it's fair, and I've said this many times in the past. Athletes are not normal people, so we shouldn't compare them to normal people. However, when I look at the moral compass and the basics of being a football player and being a professional in the workforce, whether that's a football player or an accountant or a talk show host or a data analyst, it doesn't matter. You at least have a moral compass and a guiding light in some way, shape, or form that will keep you out of trouble, or at least most people do, right? So that it doesn't affect your job, right? Like, I'm not going to go get arrested. I'm not going to go get a DUI. I'm not going to go do this, that, and the other and hurt my job or the people around me in my job or the company or something along those lines. That's basic stuff. And the way it seems like to me that Shemar Stewart and his camp are reacting to all of this kind of makes me think that the Bengals may have known something we don't know. If I'm not mistaken, and I'll have to double check this, I left my folder at work, but when I was reading in The Athletic, The Beast by Dane Brugler about Shemar Stewart, there were some concerns about moving him around, I believe in high school, to avoid any distractions that may come from Florida or wherever he was at. I don't know all the details, but I remember that being a thing. Again, the guy's never been in trouble, but there was at least that little blip that maybe he's like, okay, well, what's going on here? There's also been no production really at the college level for Shemar from a sack standpoint. So this to me is the Bengals trying to be very buttoned up and trying to say, all right, this is what we're going to do. We want you to be the guinea pig. I understand Shemar Stewart and his agent, his camp, don't want to be the guinea pig. I get it. And the Bengals probably picked a bad time to do it. But I don't know that they have many more options. Here are some of the options, though. If he doesn't want to do this, if he ultimately decides he doesn't want to play, he can sit out this year and he would re-enter the 2026 NFL draft. And if so, he could be picked by any team except the Bengals. Although he would miss out on this year, and he desperately needs development, and he would almost certainly not be a first-round pick next year, meaning he would lose out on a lot of money. The other option is, I'm blanking on some of the other options, but basically, if he were to sit out this year and try to go play somewhere else, the UFL, CFL, whatever it might be, to try to get some football in, the Bengals would then retain his rights. So whenever he returned to the NFL, his rights would still belong to the Cincinnati Bengals. So those are his two options. It's either wait a year, don't play, re-enter the draft, lose a bunch of money, or go try to play somewhere else, try to make a little money, wouldn't be able to go back to college, which I don't think he can already go back to college, and on top of all of that, the Bengals would retain your rights. Or you sign the contract. Now, there is something else that's happened that could be pretty interesting, and I have a theory about this. I mentioned earlier what Jeremy Fowler of ESPN said. He mentioned that, or he reported, I believe on Father's Day, that talks between the Bengals and Trey Hendrickson have resumed. Now, there's a couple of interesting parts about this. Number one, the Shemar Stewart thing has kind of blown up over the last week. And Joe Burrow spoke to the media last week and admitted by saying, admittedly, let me restart this. The Shemar Stewart thing has kind of blown up over the last week, and it's not getting better. Joe Burrow spoke to the media last week and used the word distraction about Trey Hendrickson. He said, of course, Trey is a distraction. We're all rooting for him. We want him here. Burrow, when he speaks, things happen. Things move. Things change. That's why Chase and Higgins are Bengals to this day. That's why Mike Gesicki is a Bengal. Joe Burrow is essentially the team president because he normally gets what he wants, as he should at this point in his career. But he openly said the Trey Hendrickson situation is a distraction. And then, all of a sudden, the Trey Hendrickson negotiations resume. Now, we're going to find out, did Trey initiate this? Did the Bengals initiate this? How did we get here with these two sides? Looking forward to having that conversation with Jeremy Fowler. But either way, Trey and the Bengals are talking again. If you listened to me last week, I said I think he's either going to retire or show up and do nothing. This would obviously be the opposite of those two things, and maybe, just maybe, mean that those two sides are working on something to potentially come to an agreement. The other part that I find interesting is, could the Bengals, now the big sticking point apparently between Trey and the Bengals is that the length of the deal. Trey wants more long-term, a more long-term extension, more peace of mind for him and his family. That's what he has said. The Bengals have been offering him a short-term deal. The Bengals might look around and say, okay, Shemar Stewart might be a problem. We don't have a bunch of guys on this defensive line that we feel super confident in. And you know what, Trey? We've got some flexibility in the cap over the next couple of years where we will give you an extra year on your extension at $28, $30 million, whatever it is. But here's the catch. You have to include the default language in your deal. What if the Bengals now shift to Trey Hendrickson and say, hey, man, we know you're a salt of the earth kind of guy. You're a great dude. You've never been in trouble. All that. We'll give you that long-term extension that you want, but we want to protect ourselves on the back end. We want to put the default language in the deal so that you be the guy, Trey, that sets the precedent and not Shemar Stewart. And then that will be able to regain all the leverage in the Shemar Stewart negotiations and try to get him signed and in camp. That, to me, is a smart play by the Bengals. I don't know if Trey would do it. I don't know if his agent would do it. But that kind of makes sense. You get what you want. It's probably a 2-year extension. It's probably $60 million. As long as there is protections for you and maybe a big signing bonus, why wouldn't Trey Hendrickson do that? And everybody essentially could be happy and in training camp, ready to go. That, to me, feels like a real possibility. And I hope that's the conversation that is happening between the Bengals and Trey. And I hope that that extra year added on to whatever extension offer the Bengals are offering him might convince Trey to say, okay, I'm willing to come down on my price a little bit. And the Bengals say, we'll put this default language in, blah, 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 whatever it might be. I wonder if that's a real possibility. We are 5 weeks away, I think 36 days away from the Bengals starting training camp. There's a lot that has to be cleaned up between now and then. Stewart and Hendrickson, obviously. The Bengals also have a deadline for their stadium lease deal with Hamilton County coming up at the end of June. From what I've heard, that's pretty close to being done between the Bengals and Hamilton County. It just kind of depends where the state funding is going to come from. And the state is still kind of trying to figure out what they want to do and how they're going to do that. And they don't see eye to eye with the Bengals or Hamilton County. Meanwhile, you've got the Browns getting a bunch of money. We can talk about all that moving forward in another episode. But right now, I look at all this and I'm like, okay, 36 days, 35 days, 5 weeks to figure out this stuff, to get these negotiations done, to figure out the future of the stadium and see if you can convince either one of these two sides either one of these two guys to sign these deals and get into training camp, because Joe Burrow has said it's a distraction. And if he says it's a distraction, it's probably a distraction. There's a lot going on. And I would love for them to enter training camp with no drama, with no stars holding out, with no draft picks whining and crying, with being able to hit the ground running, because we've talked extensively about needing to start fast. This is a critical time in the offseason. It's normally the quietest time in the offseason. Everybody's on vacation for the next 5 weeks. What are we going to find out about this team and what they're willing to do in order to make this work? Because this is a critical turning point season for this franchise. I fully believe that. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Ball Don't Lie podcast. You can follow me on anything, anywhere, anytime at Auty Elmore, AUTYELMORE. Please be sure to check out the show alongside Tony Pike. It's called Cincy 360, weekdays, noon to 3 on ESPN 1530. You can also catch me on the weekends on 700 WLW following Reds baseball, and coming up, some Sunday mornings. Some Sunday mornings on 700 WLW. Looking forward to talking to you there as well. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, whatever, on wherever you're listening to this podcast. Tell somebody about it. Share it on Twitter. Tag me in something. Do something to help the podcast grow. Thank you. I appreciate it. We'll talk again next week. This has been episode number 141 of the Ball Don't Lie podcast. As always, have fun, be safe, go Bucks.